Okay. Oh, all right. Let's find out. I see it is starting, and welcome back to another very special episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. Or is it? I question that these days. I really don't know with these crazy riots or so called peaceful protests or whatever you folks want to call them out there. Anyhow, like I said, I'm broadcasting from Los Angeles, and we are technically around the globe. There's not very many people that don't have YouTube anymore. And we've got a very special show for you today. This is probably a few decades in the making. Our guest is someone today that I've literally followed for, if not 30, 29 years. Absolutely, that is a fact. Actually, I first heard about him. I don't even know if it was because of Bob Lazar or it actually was even before that, just because of one of the publications that he wrote for, which was Aviation Weekly. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of hints out there, so let me just go ahead and properly introduce our guest. He is an author 27 times over. Keep that, in your heads, especially when we get to the second half and we have questions. You can ask questions, of course. He is the world expert on the SR-71 Blackbird, which I think is the absolute coolest airplane that's ever been built. Not to mention one of the world experts on Area 51 and S4. Not to mention has been in a ton of documentaries and has known Bob Lazar, also known as Robert Scott Lazar, for decades. I believe even going back to Area 51. So that happens to be the one and only Mr. Jim Goodall. Jim, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction.
It's all true, though.
It cracked.
It's all true.
Pardon?
Everything I said is 100% true. You are the world expert. You really are. Everything I said is true, right?
Yeah, pretty much. But I've been doing this for 50 years.
Yeah, yeah. So
I have you beat by 20 years.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I wasn't even born when you started doing this. So, yeah, you got that on me. Now, I guess the first logical place, of course, we're going to talk through quite a few things. And everybody in the chat, don't you worry, folks. I will be asking your questions. Oh, hey, Renee Cruz, thank you for joining here. And I see that you were sent here from Third Phase of Moon. I know lots of you folks today are going to be here from Third Phase of Moon. And, of course, we see play at 1080. That's so cool. I expect to see some great friends in here today. Hopefully Doc Skinner will be here, which I believe he will because he knows today what's happening. So the logical place I want to begin, Jim, is when did you first cross paths with Bob Lazar?
It's sort of a drawn-out time frame when I met him. In early January of '89, John Lear, who I've known since 1970, we were heading up to the town of Tonopah. We were going up US 95. And right near Scotty's Junction, an F-117 flew right over us at about 1,500 feet. And we about drove off the road and crashed the car because no one had seen it before, at least civilians. So we ended up, we went and had a quick bite to eat at the station house in Tonopah, and then headed to the fence line at Tonopah Test Range. And we were there, and I had my Nikons and my 200 millimeter lens out there waiting for something to come. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I saw a black dot way on a long final coming into Tonopah Test Range, and I started getting excited. Then there was a little white dot right next to it, and it turns out it was an F-117 chased by a Northrop T-38, and it was. And I started photographing it, and I was using print film, and it was exciting to the point it would be like being an 11-year-old boy and seeing a naked woman for the first time. My whole body was just surging. And out of 36 exposures, because I was running print film, this is long before digital, out of the 36 exposures, there were only 3 that weren't blurred because I was just trembling. So we we finally decided we want to get back to Las Vegas before it got too late so I can get the film processed. But we decided on our way out, we decided to stop at the Little Alien and Rachel with Joe. Joe was still alive. Joe and
Little
Pat
Alien
Travis.
Inn, right? Lil Ale Inn, like the beer, right? I know it's supposed to mean Little
Right.
Alien Inn, but that's the way it's spelled, right?
Right. So we had a bite to eat, and then we headed towards Las Vegas, about 150 miles away. And we didn't get there till after 9 o'clock. It was about 9:15 at night. And back then they had what they call photo mats. That's where the coffee baristas are today in parking lots and whatever. And it was a place where you would drop off your print film and come back the next day, and they would process it and print the film. By the time we got back to Las Vegas, the photo mats that we knew where they were closed. And I said, I've got to wait till tomorrow to get it processed and printed. And John said that, hey, I have a friend come over here in just a little bit, and I think you'll enjoy meeting him. Again, this is January of '89. Mm-hmm. And doorbell rang, and opened the door, and this nice young man came in, and he introduced himself as Bob Lazar. He had just moved there from Albuquerque. He bought a house over West Charleston. And we were chatting away, and I told him what my dilemma was. And he said, well, I got a C41 processor at home. Why don't you jump in my car? He lives in the west end of town. I said, we'll get it processed and, print. If there's any good prints in there, we'll print a couple up.
So now, is this the reason because at the time he was running a photo processing lab, right?
Right. He was doing that for a couple of realtors, and he's a techno geek anyway.
Okay.
So we jump in his car, and we're about 5 minutes out from Lear's place, and he looks at me and he says, I feel sorry for Lear. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean feel sorry for Lear? And Bob said, he's from this world-famous aviation family. He said, my God, they said his dad brought the Learjet to the world, among other things. And he said, and the son of a bitch believes in UFOs. He said, I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or put my hands on it, it doesn't exist. And then he went further to say, you couldn't put a gun to my head and convince me that UFO is real. Period. And this is while he was still interviewing for his job at S4. So that was my first introduction into Bob Lazar and the F-117, all on the same day. So it was really quite an exciting day. And because of Bob's stance on being an anti-UFO person, the fact that a year later he comes out from the dark and says that, hey, I was working on reverse engineering a propulsion system for alien spacecraft, and his story has never changed. He could have, when he first broke the thing with George Knapp, he was just a silhouetted, voice altered
Dennis.
I think they called him Jarrett.
Dennis, right?
And no, I think it was Jarrett, I believe. I can't. I don't recall for sure, but I thought it was Jarrett or something like that. And this is he hadn't been there. He hadn't gone through any of that yet. So for Bob Lazar to go from you can't put a gun to my head to convince me that UFO is real, to a guy who comes out a year or so later saying, "Guess what I've been doing for the last year." So Bob has been a straight shooter. Everything he's said to me has proven to be true. He's not the type of guy who exaggerates. And when I was talking to him in 2015, he was at the UFO conference in Phoenix.
The UFO Congress. That's right, with George Knapp.
Right.
Yes,
right.
I was there. That's where I met Michael Schrapp.
Right, and I've known Michael for about 20 years. He's like my kid. He's just a great guy. He's one of the best researchers out there. Mm-hmm. But when I met Bob and his wife Joy at the UFO conference, he said the biggest mistake he ever made in his life was going public with this. He said it has not helped him financially. It may have in the long run, but even in 2015, he says I've been hounded by every conspiracy kook and every anti-UFO person and anti-government person and anti-Area 51 person and whatever you can think of. Everybody's trying to get a piece of him. Everybody's saying, well, I know he's lying. Well, they don't know. Unless they were working with him or have known him for a long time. I have always been and I will always be a strong proponent of Bob Lazar. He's a friend. I can pick up the telephone and call him. I know where he lives, but I won't tell the world.
And he doesn't want that, obviously, right?
No, absolutely not. No. I mean, he's a private person, and the fact that when he showed up in 2015, that was the first time in 25 years that he had gone public. He'd been in the public realm. So he has not been in it for the money. He has not been in it for the notoriety. For all intents and purposes, going public was the worst decision he ever made. To quote Bob.
Yeah. So, I don't blame him at all for that.
Bob Lazar's pardon?
I don't blame him at all for not enjoying going public because it's done nothing but destroy his life.
Right. But the thing is, the people who hired him, or said that Bob said that hired him, have all refused to comment. And the reason I say that, I had a real high clearance for 27 years in the military. It was at or above top secret, and it was only if my boss needed it, because I was the wing historian. Mm-hmm. Bob has always been a straight shooter with me. I mean, but when George Knapp said that he went and interviewed or talked with Edward Teller to see if he can get a comment on Bob, and Edward Teller said no comment. Now, if you're dealing with a classified subject or a classified program or a classified code word name or whatever, you cannot use that. You cannot confirm nor deny. So when Teller and the other people that George Knapp interviewed say no comment, then they're adhering to proper security protocol, because if Bob was a fraud, like some people have said, all Teller and the other people that Bob said he'd worked with and George Knapp had talked to, and all they say was no comment. If he'd been a fraud, it would have been very easy, and it would have nipped everything in the bud right then and there for Teller and the other people to say, hey, I don't know the guy. I don't know where he came from. He's full of baloney, and I have nothing more to say. But he's a fraud. He's not real. They didn't say that. They said no comment. And to add to that, I was in the Pentagon during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I was with the Minnesota Air Guard. I was a traditional weekender. I had 5 years active, a 10-year break, and then 21 years with the Air Guard. And I was activated for Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and I'm in the Pentagon, and I had a couple hours to kill, and I had Bob Lazar's W-2 from when he worked at S4.
Isn't that because he was paid by the Navy, right?
Correct. The Navy handles. It used to be the Army handled all the real spooky stuff, and now it's the Navy. So here I have this Bob's W-2, and I look up Naval Investigative Services or Department of Naval Intelligence. I can't even remember the exact title. I couldn't find the exact name of the organization within the Navy that you work for, but I got one that was close. So I'm in uniform, and at the time I was a tech sergeant. I was an E6. And I'm in uniform, and I go over to the other side of the Pentagon, and I walk into this office. The door's open, and there's a young, I think it was Lieutenant JG, behind the counter, behind the desk, and I said, "Sir, can you tell me where this place is located. And I handed him Bob's W-2. He looks at it for a second, and he says, "Excuse me a minute." And he goes and walks into the two-star admiral's office. He's in there for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and comes out and said, "The admiral will see you now." Now, those of you who have been in the military will understand this. No Navy admiral is going to talk to an enlisted puke from the United States Air Force without an appointment. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So when I went in there, I gave him a sharp salute. He didn't say at ease. He said parade rest. So I'm standing there at parade rest, and he's looking at Lazar's W-2, and he said, "Sergeant, I don't know where you got this, but if I ever see your face cross the threshold of my office ever again, you'll be the most sorry son of a bitch sergeant in the United States military. Do you understand me, Sergeant?" I said, "Yes, sir."
Talk about a threat.
He said, "You're dismissed." And with that, he took Bob's W-2 and put it into shredder.
Oh, jeez.
So I gave him a sharp salute, did an about face, and walked out the door. Now, if Bob was a fraud, he would have not had this. Now, this is 1990, so it had only been a short time since Bob had gone public, and for this two-star to be that upset. If Bob was a fraud, it would have been the Lieutenant J.G. was said, "I have no idea," and I'd been on my way. But it got a reaction by a flag officer that this was important enough for him to call me into his office, to chastise me and threaten me, and then destroy the W-2.
You know, a couple of things I'll add to that. First of all, Bob Lazar said, I've seen in other interviews, which I'm sure he's told you in person, is that if he was going to lie about this, wouldn't he have just come up with a much better lie? All right?
Yeah.
I would think so, too. And I know other people have heard me say this, and I think this applies perfectly now. And since you were there in 2015, I'm sure you remember Jeremy Corbell debating Stanton Friedman.
Oh.
Right?
Yep.
And so each time I interviewed Stanton Friedman, and I've been a steadfast believer of Bob Lazar, just like you said, although I don't know him personally, I've never had the honor, privilege of interviewing him, but just by paying attention to him for 30 years, I think it was 30 years, because in 89 I didn't even know him. He wasn't public in 89, right?
No, near the end of '89, I think it was.
Okay. Regardless, Stan Friedman won't even look past the fact that he couldn't find evidence of his school and talks about Pierce College, which is not far from me. It's a junior college. And Stan Friedman was saying, I can't find evidence of him going to MIT or Caltech. And I find that he was a poor student C student in high school, and he just never even decided to look past the fact that Bob did work at Los Alamos. He was on the cover of the Los Alamos Times. As a matter of fact, when Georgia Knapp took him to Los Alamos, he walked through the laboratory and people recognized him. So there's so much evidence that piles on, and I believe even people have come forward now and talked about being at Caltech with them, being at MIT with them. Well, my own experience to Stanton Friedman, and which I always said to him, was Stanton, I would say, I myself was not a very good student in high school. Not because I wasn't smart, just because I didn't care at the time. I was, in high school, I just was more interested in meeting women, etc. I said it wasn't until I got to junior college that I actually tried. Then I went off to UCSB, and I did very well. I graduated magna cum laude, and I said, with that, I went off to applying to some of the top law schools in this country and getting in. I said, Stan, it's not hard for Bob Lazar to get to junior college, do well, and then transfer to MIT Caltech. He never wanted to hear. So I thought, just throw that out there because it just goes to show that some people, no matter what evidence they're presented with, they just don't want to look past the initial parts and to believe any of this story, which, again, sounds outlandish at first, but when you talk about the details that Bob's known, and like you said, you've known him, you've known his family, he doesn't lie to his friends. Like you said, he's a straight shooter. Then when you look at all of the evidence, still it is circumstantial, but the guy's so consistent. Um, there is.
Well, and as far as being a poor student, Thomas Edison, when he was in eighth grade, her teacher sent a note to his mother and said, "You would probably be well advised to pull young Tom Edison out of school since he's incapable of learning." And was it Albert Einstein flunked mathematics in school, in grade school? So just because you did poorly in school. Now when I was in high school, now this is 1,000 years ago, I was considered a juvenile delinquent, and either I got A's or A pluses, or I got D's and F's. I either liked the class or I didn't. If I liked the class, I did well. If I didn't like it, I got bad grades. But when I got out of the service, I went to college. I got straight A's. I had straight A's through all my time in secondary education.
And that's because you got to choose classes that you enjoyed.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I was bored silly, and I went to Los Altos High School in Silicon Valley. And even back in the 50s and the 60s, if you wanted to be a teacher at Los Altos High School, you had to have at least a master's, I think it was a master's degree in the subject you taught. And, my science teacher, Mr. Smith, I mean, that was his real name. He was a PhD candidate in genetics. And that's what we taught. I mean, that's what was taught in biology in my freshman year of high school was genetics. I didn't. I got an A in the class, but I got it, which cracks me up. I flunked 3 years of high school English because I hated writing term papers. And then what I end up doing later in my life, I'm a published author with
27 books. That's a lot, by the way, for those out there.
Well, my 27th one will be out in February, and it is a 332-page hardbound book with over 1,000 photos, and it is the 75 years of the Lockheed Skunk Works.
Ooh, that's actually going to be a really exciting book that I would love to read when it's published. Now, I normally don't break for questions this early, but there have been two that have been sitting that I want to ask. Plus, there was one that was requested a while ago. But then I want to stay on the Lazar story because I have some questions that other people normally don't ask because they want to know the story that's been told over and over again. So let me ask this question here. This one's written about 10 minutes ago. This is from Lasha Senya.
Okay.
She says, if the military has made progress in alien propulsion systems, why have we not seen any in airplanes yet or even heard about it from whistleblowers?
Well, let's use an example of my favorite airplane, the Blackbird. The CIA funded and flew the very first Blackbirds back in, the first one flew on April 26, 1962. It started being developed in the, late 50s. The airplane was operational through June of 1968. The Air Force did not acknowledge the existence of the CIA version of the Blackbird, the A-12, until it had been retired for 20 years. So the fact that there may be craft out there that are using alien propulsion capabilities, it could be operational for the last 10 or 15 years, and we just don't know about it. They're really good at keeping secrets. And one of the ways they keep secrets, if you're working in the black classified environment, your lifeblood is your security clearance. And all they have to say is if we suspect that you may have said something that you shouldn't have, or you talked to the wrong person, and God forbid it would be Jim Goodall, that could affect your security clearance.
Now, which would prevent you from getting work, obviously.
Right. And if your entire life has focused around being working in the classified environment, and all of a sudden they tell you, hey, we don't trust you anymore, and we pulled your clearance. Now, we know you talked to George Knapp, or we know you talked to Jim Goodall, or you know we talked with Dr. J, or whatever it is. We're not going to prosecute you for that. We're just going to cancel your clearance, which means the environment that you have spent 10 to 30 years working in, all of a sudden, you can't work in that environment anymore, and you have to go to McDonald's and ask if they want fries with that burger. I mean, it's that simple.
Our minds are so on the same point, because I was just going to say about the McDonald's too. I swear to God.
Yeah.
This is part 2 of her question, and
Sure.
I think it's actually still linked to the first one. Have they developed invisibility technology at all? Has Mr. Goodall heard about any of that stuff?
I had a dear friend who was ended up being the president of Lockheed Skunk Works. His name was Ben Rich. He replaced Kelly Johnson, and for some reason, Ben liked me. And at the time, he's passed away now, but my very, very dear friend John Andrews from Testers, the Tester Model Company. But Ben and I spoke once a quarter for almost 25 years. If I didn't call him, he called me, and I could call the Skunk Works. His secretary June would answer the phone. She'd recognize my voice. I said, "Hi there." I said, "Oh, just a second." I said, "Mr. Rich is in a meeting, but he said anytime you call, just put you through." So he'd put me on speakerphone. I know there's a room full of engineers and staff in his office, and Ben and I would sit and talk 20 to 40 minutes, just talking about airplanes and spooky stuff. And he'd never say Area 51, but he always referred to it as the test site. But just before he died,
right?
Right. No, the test site.
Gotcha.
The Nevada test site. The Area 51 was referred to internally as just the test site.
Gotcha.
Because they can't say Area 51. They probably can say it now, but back then they couldn't. But about 10 days before Ben died, I called him up. He was at USC Medical Center. He had terminal esophageal cancer. And we were talking about John Andrews and the Testers Aurora model and a bunch of other stuff. But as we're getting near the end of our conversation, he said, "Jim, we have things out in the desert." Now, he wasn't referring to Area 51. He said, "We have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. Not what you think you could build in 50 years, but what you can comprehend. And if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort."
Hasn't he also told you that we have technology now to take ET home, which is wow?
No, he said that at UCLA at a
the engineering alumni.
It was engineering alumni at UCLA right after he retired. He retired in 91. And right after Desert Storm, he wanted to stay there until the F-117 proved its worth. So no, he said that to the UCLA engineering alum, we have the ability today to take ET home, but the government will not allow us to release the technology. Or right along those lines. The quote is searchable. You look at Ben Rich talk at UCLA engineering alum, and you'll see the exact quote.
And there was something in there that said something to the effect of there was a problem in the equation and we fixed it, right?
I don't recall that part.
If I'm not mistaken, he did say that in the UCLA, but I'll go ahead and find that before we finish. But let me get to this other part here. And again, I'm going to circle right back to where we just are with Bob Lazar in Area 51. I just figured this is a good point to ask that question. This comes from the Cousins brothers from Third Phase of Moon. For everybody out there, in the coming months, I believe around December, everyone pay attention. There's going to be a fantastic movie available on all streaming services. So, Jim, this question is for you. What was your, without revealing any of the Easter eggs and surprises in the film. Yeah, right. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. What
Yeah.
was your experience filming that documentary, which is soon to be released, which not only stars you but also Dr. Stephen Greer, Michael Sala, and more?
Well, I was up visiting Doc Skinner. I was on the beginning of a 3-week road trip, and he was talking to the Cousin brothers, and they asked him a question. They were looking for somebody, and that somebody was me. And they asked Doc. They said, "Do you have any idea how we can find a Jim Goodall?" Doc says, "Well, he's standing right next to me." So
Talk about the universe working in mysterious ways, right?
Well, I've always been a firm believer people come in and go out of your life because they're supposed to. And the day I met Doc Skinner, I knew immediately that I'm meeting an old friend for the first time. And it's sort of a strange feeling when you meet someone, but you feel like you've known them forever, even though it's the first time you met. But I met him at the Disclosure Con in Phoenix last year. Up until that point, I was not involved or doing anything in the UFO community. For 10 years, I was pretty much off the grid. I was the associate curator at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor for 4 years. And if you work for a museum, you can't write. And before that, I was working for the Museum of Flight as a restoration manager. So when I retired in August of 2013 is when I started writing again. And I've been pumping out about one book a year. And I focused on photo essays. I did, my first one was on the B-2, and it's hardbound, 160 pages. It's from Sheffer Publishing. And then I did my second book with them, which was on the Los Angeles class fast attacks. Someone said, "Well, how the heck do you go from the Blackbird and UFOs to submarines?" I said, "They're black, they're stealth, and they're deadly."
Huh, nice.
I said, "Oh, that makes good sense." And then I did my premiere book on the Blackbird. It's 224 pages, 711 photos, of which about 40% of them have never been in print or never been. Some of them have never. Even Lockheed didn't have some of them, and that's out now. It's hardbound. And then my fourth book from Sheffer was on the Seawolf Virginia class fast attacks. And then I'm just finishing up book number 26. 27 is at the publisher. 26, I'm waiting to get access on an Ohio-class SSGN Arsenal boat. I've already covered the C4 and the D5 ballistic missile submarine Ohio boats. Now I'm just waiting to get on a Arsenal boat. So that's what I've been doing.
You got some more questions, which again I normally would wait till the second part, but people, you're a star, Jim. So here's that.
That part cracks me up. I mean, when I ran into Doc, he said, this was last year. He said, "Oh my God!" I said, "You're not in the program." I said, "Well, I didn't decide to come here until this morning. I came here to see Michael Schratt. He's a longtime friend of mine, and Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp were coming into town, and I've been friends with George for 40 years, been friends with Michael for like 20, 25. Ever since he started, I think he'd seen me on one of my 50+ talking head pieces on Discovery Channel in 2020 and 60 Minutes and those types. So.
And other documentaries, like, for instance, Norio Hayakawa's Nippon TV. I've seen that documentary, at least one of them, where you were in Norio's documentary.
Yeah, and like I say, I've been a talking head on over 50 TV programs, but I didn't do anything. I mean, I was totally off the grid, away from UFOs, away from virtually everything for 10 years. And it wasn't until last year that I finally stuck my toe into the pond, so to speak, and then I got pushed in. So I'm totally immersed in it now. So
You know, it's funny. I'm actually reading something here. I'm going to read the question, but someone wrote here they think you're John Lear, and I was just going to let everyone know. No, this is not John Lear using a different voice. John will be, as you've heard, he's been on the show multiple times. He will be back on soon, but they do know each other, as you heard Jim talk about earlier on. And this next question from Gidon actually has a question about John Lear for you, Jim. This reads,
Sure.
was John Lear deeper into CIA-type killing missions that he flew?
John flew for Continental Air Service, which was a subsidiary for Air America. And he flew for them for, I think it was 14 years. And his primary job in Southeast Asia, because he flew in Laos and Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, was he was courier and supply runner. Yeah, I've seen pictures of some of the landing strips that he's landed on. Now he's in a short takeoff and short landing high wing Stovall type airplane, and usually turbopropped single engine. And he's landing on a 700-foot dirt runway that's filled with chuck holes, and it's about a 10-degree list off to one side, where they've chopped off the top of a mountain. He's middle of the jungle, and on either end, the approach or the takeoff end, it drops right off into deep jungle. So he would land on those things, and sometimes he would land as he's making his landing. He's being shot out by VC, so he just, as he's over the landing strip, he just reaches over and pushes whatever he was bringing to that location out the door.
The cargo.
So he flew. I think at one time, I think John said that he was type rated in over 40 different aircraft types, and most of them are civilian. But he did, he has flown OV-10s and O2s. I think he actually, they got a whole bunch of ferry pilots together, and they filled the O2s. And that's the Cessna Skymaster pusher puller. They took everything out that wasn't absolutely necessary for the flight. They put in all sorts of auxiliary fuel tanks on it, and they took off from Hamilton Air Force Base near San Rafael, California, on the San Francisco Bay, in the north end of the bay, and they were flying nonstop from there to Hawaii. And that's 2,350 some odd miles of open ocean, and you're flying by the seat of your pants. But they managed to ferry all the airplanes into Vietnam, and it worked out fine. But John Lear, for those who haven't had the joy of knowing him, he is a character. I mean, maybe they have already, but they could actually write a comical type movie about John Lear and some of his exploits. I mean, he's been all over the world. He's been in some of the most remote places you ever think of. He's, one of the things he said he loved back in the early 70s when he and Mary Lee were still married. They were in Beirut, Lebanon. He said that was the Paris of the Mediterranean. And now it's, they're 20 years later after Civil War, it's just a empty shell of what it once was. But John is fun. John is a character, and he's also a rascal. I mean, he's pulled some stunts on me where I thought he was so pissed at me that he was almost shaking. And he's giving me the riot act up one side, down the other, and all of a sudden I see the twinkle in his eye, and I look at him. He said, "Lear, you son of a bitch!" And he started laughing. He said, "Hey, I almost got you."
That sounds like Lear for sure.
Oh yeah,
in the many interviews I've done with him, one thing that I always cracks me up about just the audacity of the Air America story was flying weapons. I believe it was to Central Africa. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he said that on one, when he was flying into Africa, they had one tail number, but on the other side, they'd painted a whole different tail number because they wanted the air traffic controllers who were watching them to make them think it was two different aircraft, when actually it was the same aircraft with two different tail numbers.
When the original CIA A-12 Blackbirds were doing reconnaissance over North Korea and North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, there were times where they would do the same thing. They would paint one tail number on one side of the Blackbird and a totally different one on the other side. And the other thing they would do is, because they had plane spotters, Russian and North Vietnamese plane spotters living in Okinawa, and they lived on what they called Habu Hill. And there was a tavern. It's outside the base. It's outside the fence line. It was a 2-story tavern, and they came to the realization that the Russian spies were up on the second floor, looking across the blast fence to write down what airplanes took off and whatever. So they decided they were going to raise the blast shields so the second story couldn't see the hammerhead there at Kadena. And they spent a couple, 2 or 3 days, increasing the height of this blast fence. And once they finished, the next day there was a third story on the bar outside the base. So what they did, they would also paint the numbers in water-based paint or latex, which would burn off, and the original or the permanent painted numbers would be there. So they were doing that all the time. The North Vietnamese and the Russians really had no idea what tail number was going on, and the tail numbers were changed on every flight.
That sounds like typical agency stuff to me. That's a detail I didn't know, that they actually had water-based paint that would burn off, which makes perfect sense, to cover up the tail number, again, to make it seem like two different questions. This other question is actually a really good question, and I'm glad Rockstar asked it. Let me go back to it here. In your opinion, Jim, how long do you think the Space Force has been in existence? Great question.
I would have to say from Apollo 1 forward.
Whoa. Interesting. That actually reminds me of, even though I've spoken to, before his passing, Edgar Mitchell multiple times. I did multiple interviews with him. As a matter of fact, I never released the last interview with him, only because it happened within a week before his passing, and I just thought it was. So he never told me that, secret space program or anything like that, but he did infer that there was a military space program without actually saying, "I've seen that." Can you tell us a little bit about that?
They had the Man Orbiting Laboratory, which they used, I think, as Saturn 1B to launch that into orbit. And it was actually a manned reconnaissance satellite. And that they were going to enhance it. They were going to build a whole bunch of them, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen. And of course, I wasn't privy to why the program was canceled and why it ended up the way it did. But no, I think the Space Force has been around, if not a formal organization. Well, you go to Falcon Air Force Station. I think it's attached now to Buckley Air Force Base, just outside of Denver, in Aurora, Colorado. That they've always been sort of the Space Force. And same with the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD. They're responsible for everything in orbit, determining where it's at, all the space junk and everything else. So I think there's been if it hasn't been a formally announced organization, I think it's been around since we were heading to the moon.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking over 50 years, literally.
God, it's been that long?
Yeah, it's
I
been
guess it has been, hasn't it?
51
Yeah.
years. Yeah, that we just
Yeah.
yeah. It blows my mind how much time has gone by. Speaking of going to the moon, if we talk about the technology, about how fast it is blown up, I mean, we're talking exponential. So you got the Wright brothers. What is it? 1909, 1904. Okay, beginning of 1900s, right? Not even
Right.
60 some odd years later, if we want to say 1904, 65 years later, we're landing on the moon. Wow, okay. Do you think that some of the technology that got us there was because of some of the progress made at what Bob Lazar or people prior to him had worked on? Because if Bob Lazar didn't work there till the late 80s, well, if we had possession of Roswell craft since 47, Cape Girardeau, Missouri since 41, or even going back earlier than that, Aurora, Texas, 1896, well, I guess the question is, do you think that we've been able to incorporate some of that technology which eventually got us to the moon?
Well, let's put it this way. In early 1947, we had vacuum tubes, electromechanical relays, and copper wire. By the end of 1947, we had the beginnings of transistors. We had the beginning of software, the ones and zeros. We had the beginning of
Binary.
superconductivity.
The ones and zeros, binary, you mean, right?
Right, right. I mean, all that came in a very, very short period of time. There's a book that my dad gave me. Oh God, it seems like 1,000 years ago. It was called The Day After Roswell.
Philip Corso. I got that book right here.
Yeah, right. And you read it and you say, "Huzzah!" It makes sense. It took DuPont 15 years to reverse engineer Kevlar because it has no common link to anything that we had before. I mean, and the components to put it together made no sense unless it was given to you and you were doing a chemical analysis to break it down to see if you can replicate it. So, a lot of advances that allowed us to go to the moon, we use every day today. Your iPhone or your smartphone, your flat screen TV, the internet, just cell phone. I mean, just look at a cell phone.
Oh, not even a cell phone. These things are computers these days, and not just computers. I mean, this iPhone right here near me has so many more capabilities than, say, a laptop from 15 years ago. It blows me away that every day I learn something that I didn't even know about a device that I've been using one version of for at least 12 years now.
Well, my dad back in the 60s was director of engineering at Silco Ford Western Development Laboratories in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. And in early 1960, Dad brought home a brass board version of the first computer to go into Voyager, the first man-made object to leave the solar system. It was about the size of your Apple TV box. It's like 4 by 4 by about an inch or 2 inches. Mm-hmm. That's how big it was. And in 1960 dollars, it cost $1.2 million. And it had, hold your hat, it had, count them, 4K of memory.
Wow. Nothing. Literally nothing.
Your glasses have more memory than that. About 5 months later, he brought home the brass board version, the finalized version. It was now $2.1 million in 1960 dollars, and it was now up to 16K of memory. That's what has the record on the side of the Voyager with the humans and the calculation of where we're at. I mean, that was the hottest thing. That was the hottest thing going. That was the most incredible computer on the planet, pretty much. And you have more computer. You and I have more computer power in our smartphones than the entire world had in 1980. let alone 1950 something or 60 something.
That's a scary thought. This little iPhone has more technology than the entire world did 60 years ago, or
No,
40 years ago.
30 years ago.
1990.
Now, I was in media storage business for a long time. And I can remember I was working for a company called Nortronics. They're out of Golden Valley, Minnesota. And I was responsible for the disk drive industry for North America. I had 43 disk drive manufacturers, to include IBM, Digital Equipment Corporation, Hewlett-Packard, and so on and so forth. And we had just transitioned from 8-inch floppies to 5 1/4 inch, and we were just going into the 100 DPI. I think it was DPI back then. It was a 600 kilobyte floppy, double-sided.
Okay.
That was 1980 or 1978. 1981, I was at Comdex 81 in Chicago, and they had the 5 1/4 inch drives all over the place. But Toshiba was there with a 3.5 inch diskette. So I brought a couple of those home with me, and I went to my boss, director of marketing, and I said, Mervyn, I said, this is the future. And I threw the diskette on his desk. And he said, well, so no, it'll never happen. He said, we're just now transitioning from 8-inch to 5 1/4 inch floppies. I said, no, this is going to be the next. So it took 11 years from the introduction of the 5 1/4 inch drive to the 3.5 inch diskette. And then it was 5.5 years to go from the diskette to a CD. And then it took another half-life to go from that to an SD card the size of a postage stamp. And when I was at Doc Skinner's, he had a micro SD card that was, I think, a half a terabyte. And it was the size of your fingernail.
Yeah, and you put it in a SD card, right, to fit into a drive, right?
Right. So, technology it keeps having a half-life of the technology before, and pretty soon it's going to be, things are going to change weekly eventually.
Yeah, I know Moore's law is coming to an end, so that would be the case.
Right. So now I think all the technology advances started in '47, and that's when Roswell was. They may not have gotten a lot of technology out of the Cape Girardeau incident, but I don't know. But based on the day after Roswell, they got a ton of stuff out of them. And as a little postscript and a side thing, it was about 10 years ago, now maybe 12 years ago. I was working for the Museum of Flight at Painfield, and they were there was going to be a function or luncheon at the Future of Flight, which is the other side of Painfield. And one of the persons that was supposed to be there with the Museum of Flight had to cancel because of family problems. So he said, hey, Jim, he said, do you want to go to the luncheon? I said, free lunch? Sure. So I go up there, and I'm sitting there's about 10 round tables and 6 or 7 guys per table. And it was a Korean War fighter group get together. And I'm sitting next to a guy that I recognize. And I said, he looked at, I said, sir, my name is Jim Goodall with the Museum of Flight. And he says, well, I'm Buzz Aldrin. I said, yes, sir, I know. I said, what's your feeling towards UFOs? And he starts smiling, and he turns his back on me. And he laughed a little bit. And he made no comment, but he just he gave me a grin like, you're not supposed to know that. But and I've asked that to a couple different people that are way up in the food chain. What is your feeling about UFOs? And again, but Buzz Aldrin just smiled and sort of turned his back because he didn't want to laugh in my face. I didn't want to snicker in my face because he could tell he wanted to say something, but he knew he couldn't. or shouldn't, whatever the
Or
case may be.
both, right? Yeah, yeah. And he's made a few comments, like I believe the obelisk that's on Phobos, that once we figure out there's a giant monolith there, we're going to freak out. And, I'm just curious because there was, what was it, 2 minutes or maybe even just 10 seconds during Apollo 11 where we don't have that we're missing that audio, and allegedly Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were discussing that they were being observed. Have you heard that story? While on the
Yeah,
moon? Can you
yeah,
tell us a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Well, no, I mean just the fact that there was something up there, and NASA cut the feed, and they just felt that they were that they weren't alone. Now another thing, I think it was Story Musgrave. I think that was him.
Mm-hmm. Interviewed him multiple times.
He was repairing. He was doing a repair job on the Hubble. I think that was the right person.
Yes. Yeah, he's flown from
asked
Gemini, Mercury, Apollo to Space Shuttle. That's the guy.
Right. A journalist asked him when you were waiting for 5 hours or whatever it was to you had a lot of downtime during the repair of the Hubble. What'd you do? He said, "I'm looking for UFOs." And he wasn't. This wasn't a ha-ha. I'm looking for UFOs. This was
serious,
a real observation. I was looking for UFOs.
Well, if I was out there too, I'd probably that would have been the first thing I would have been doing. Long before they sent me out to go repair the Hubble, I would have been like, okay, I'm in space. Let's see who's watching. Because, almost every time I've seen the ISS, you see something going by, and what does NASA do? They shut the feed down. Even when SpaceX sent up the 2 astronauts to the ISS, that too is being observed. There, I think it was the Dragon. I believe every single thing we've ever launched, every manned mission at least, almost always they were being observed on one level or not, and a lot of astronauts have even said so in public transmissions.
Well, my boss in the Air Guard, Major General Wayne Gatlin, when he was just a major, not a major general, but just a major, they were on alert at Duluth. They had F-94Cs, which at the time was a pretty fast airplane. It had afterburning, and they get emergency call from Finley Air Force Station, which is on the North Shore of Lake Superior. It said, "We have a high-speed unknown over central Lake Superior." Now, back then the rules were, even for military aircraft, you do not fly across Lake Superior. You fly around. Lake Superior it's a large enough body of water. It makes its own weather, and the water is very, very cold, and it gets very hot and humid in the upper Midwest. They get really nasty thunderstorms. But they got a call that there was a high-speed unknown over Lake Superior. So they launched the 3 alert birds. They were in full burner. They head out to where the location was. They're vectored in towards where the object is heading towards Finley. They get up close to it. General Gatlin said he could see it. The weapons systems operator, or the WISO in the back, turns on his weapons radar, and it just, as soon as he locks on, the radar just dies. So he pulled the circuit breaker, reset it, tried to lock on again. It dies. This happened like 2 or 3 times. And they're in full burner, and you can't be in full burner for more than about 90 seconds in the old 50s vintage jets. And they're talking with Finley, and he said, "It's heading straight towards us. Hey, it's disappeared. You didn't go past us. It's disappeared." And General Gatlin said they were still in full burner. And as they're coming up, they can see the geodesic dome from Finley. And General Gatlin gets on the radio, and he said, "Finley, this is aircraft such and such." He said, "Well, the reason you can't see it on your radar, it's hovering directly above you." And the guys went running out, and here's this object. I didn't know if it was a disc or a round ball or whatever. It was just this object. And as soon as they went outside, this thing took off straight up visibility unlimited. And if you were down on a well and you looked up at the sky, you could see stars. I mean, that's how clear it was, even in middle of the day. And this thing just went straight up and disappeared with visibility unlimited.
Wow.
And I worked for General Gatto. That's when I asked him. We were having lunch one day. I said, "Sir, do you believe in UFOs?" And he said, "Yeah, I chased one." That's when he gave me his what he did. And then there's the SR-71 pilot who now denies it. I think he's been talked to.
Probably, yeah. If he told a story and then changes his mind. I'd love to hear this story. This is the first time I've ever heard of an SR-71 pilot while piloting a Blackbird come in contact with something.
His first name is Dave. I won't give his last name because he's still alive, and I talked to him sporadically. But I'd interviewed him at his home, and I asked him because I was doing some research on guys who've crashed Blackbirds, and he happened to be in a Blackbird that crashed. He got out okay. I said, "Dave," "so what's your feeling about UFOs?" He said, "They're real." I said, "You want to explain upon that?" And he said, "Sure." He said, "This is early 1970s, so it's 71, 72 time frame. He's flying out of Kadena, Okinawa. He's in a night training mission. Now, the SR-71, the first two-thirds of its life as an operational aircraft, it flew only daylight VFR type flying.
Visual flight rating, right?
Right. It doesn't have weather radar. It flies above the weather, so it has none of those, and it doesn't have collision avoidance radar either. It's just, but he was doing a night training mission. They were at about 78,000 feet at 2.7 Mach, and that's the sweet spot until you're going over target. 2.7. You're still going fast to get there, but you're not thermally stressing the systems on the airplane, because you go from Mach 2.7 to Mach 3.2, the overall heating of the airframe goes up exponentially. I mean, it's amazing how hot that airplane gets flying through 70 below zero weather. So he said it was about a 3/4 moon off on the left-hand side of the airplane. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and they're going straight. And all of a sudden, Dave sees another object, probably 7,000 or 8,000 feet above him, and maybe 5 or 6 miles away. It's metallic. He's getting glints off the 3/4 moon, and this object is heading on the same heading that he is, at the same speed, but 5 or 6 miles off to the right, and 6,000 or 7,000, maybe 8,000 feet above him. So he gets on the horn and he calls Kadena on secure voice to see if there was another SR-71 flying. I said, "No, you're up there by yourself." He said, "No, I'm not." About the same time as backseater, the reconnaissance systems operator, he said, "Hey, Dave," said, "we got company." He said, "Yeah, I'm going to take a closer look." So he advanced. Now, the thing about the Blackbird, at Mach 2.7, you're at minimum throttle. That airplane just likes to fly fast. So Dave pushes the throttles forward. It was about a 10-degree starboard bank, right-hand bank, and he starts climbing and heading towards to get closing the gap between his airplane and whatever it was up there. He said he was still a mile or two away. He's still getting glints off this object. Even with all the stars out there, he cannot discern the shape. Because what we see was just, if you have a whole sky full of stars, all you'll have is, you'll have a blank area where there's no stars, and that would be the shape. He couldn't determine the shape. And he said when he was still a couple thousand feet below him, maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet below the object, and still a mile or two away, this thing took off at an angle of attack of about 30 degrees and left him in the dust. He figured it left him going between 8,000 and 12,000 miles an hour.
Wow!
And he lost sight of it. He said he figured between 180 and 200,000 feet.
And let me guess, no sonic boom.
Nothing.
Yeah.
No propulsion. No afterburner. No propulsion sound. We can't hear anything anyway up there. But there was no sight of a propulsion system, afterburner glowing or anything glowing. So, fast forward to 1980. He's retired from the Air Force. The guys that worked in the spooky programs, the Blackbird programs, maybe the F-117 programs or whatever, once they get out, they have a real high clearance. They can step right into the spooky community without skipping a beat. So he ended up getting a job as facility manager at Area 51.
No wonder why he doesn't want to talk after that.
Well, he knows most of the guys that were working there because it's a very, very small community. Those guys work on spooky programs. So he said he was there about a year, and then he just started asking. When he was comfortable that everybody was comfortable with him, he made some inquiries to some of the people that had been there forever, and he said he found out that whatever he was chasing did not fly out of Area 51, nor was it anything like that flight tested there. So I asked him about S4, and he was familiar with Lazar. During my interview with him, he was aware of Lazar, and he said some guys on they call the red and whites, which are the Janet flights. He did inquire to a couple of them that worked at the time frame that Bob worked there, and asked him, "Do you ever remember seeing a guy named Bob Lazar?" And he said, just a handful of guys said, yeah, they recognized the name, and they would probably recognize the person. So, but I think Jeremy got hold of him and asked him about the chasing the UFO, and he denied it. But he told me we were having a glass of drink of sweet tea in his living room when he was recounting the event. So I think someone got to him and told him that no, we don't want you talking about this.
And if you do, so you ain't gonna have your job anymore or your clearance.
Well, no, he's retired. He just doesn't want to be blackballed by the Blackbird Association, like me.
I see.
The president of the Blackbird Association. I think he thinks I'm a threat to his standing as the world's foremost authority in the Blackbird from a pilot's point of view. I won't give his name because it's not worth giving out his name. But people who in the Blackbird community know who the president of the Blackbird Association is, and he's a jerk. I don't know why he doesn't like me. I've never tried to trample on his turf, so to speak, other than the fact that I'm a known expert per Lockheed. Ben Rich once told me, he said, Jim, says, for a guy who never worked here, said, there's probably no one around more knowledgeable in the history of the development and operation of the Blackbird than me. So that was an honor given to me by Ben Rich, and I cherished that.
There's a super chat I want to thank. It's been here for quite some time. Rockstar, thank you so much for your support, and I want to say you rock. Again, thank you. I do apologize for the delay in saying that. I didn't want to interrupt Jim with this amazing story. Now, I want to catch up on some of the questions, and Rock, perfect time to start with your question. This is from Rockstar. It reads, what does Jim think about CERN?
About
CERN? No, CERN.
CERN. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're in Switzerland and France.
That's right. Yes, Switzerland.
I don't know why it went to the Europeans, but that's my feeling. And they've been playing with it now for 25 years? And I don't know if they've gotten any data out of it. I know when Stanford developed a linear accelerator there at Stanford, it runs a couple miles. They were concerned that when they start breaking some of these elements down to subatomic particles or whatever, they weren't sure quite what was going to happen, whether everything was going to go boom or whatever. But no, CERN is a tool. It's a tool to investigate the structure of what makes us, and that's all the little quarks and subatomic particles that make up atoms.
So-called God particles, right? That they're looking into.
Yeah, right. And the more we dig into it, the less we know. And that's the funny part of the whole thing. Is that the more we dig, the more we find out, the less we know.
True, and that's what I've noticed comes with a lot of things. You think you have one impression, and then you dig a little bit, you think you have the answer, but then you go down the rabbit hole even more, and it's like you have 100 times more questions than you did at the onset.
Right, right.
There's someone here I want to throw a shout out to. Let me get the name properly. Where is it? It is, I believe it's Sven's. Sven, I want to give you a shout out. Thank you. I didn't know I had a fan in Norway, so I appreciate you being here live. So that's pretty cool. Now let me go backtrack a little bit because there was a question I missed here, which you are definitely the authority to ask this for. This was from Playa 1080. Has anyone heard about the U.S. Navy getting a patent for what they call a hybrid aerospace underwater craft, HAUC?
I've heard of it. I've heard reference to it. For all I know, the Tic Tacs that have been flying in and around naval ships and whatever could very well be one of ours.
That's why I'm glad you brought up this next topic, which I'm really glad you brought it up, because I was going to ask you, what is your opinion on what the Tic Tac, gimbal, and Go Fast video were? Now, the gimbal does, in fact, look partly like the sport model, but more importantly, behaves like what Bob Lazar said. Now, the Tic Tac, that not only looks different, it looks like I don't even want to call it a cigar-shaped craft because it's much smaller, like a Tic Tac. Do you think that is our reverse engineered technology that is using gravity? Or do you think what Michio Kaku, when I had him on this show, he said that he believes it's possibly an extraterrestrial drone, which is kind of cool for him to say such a thing. Or do you think that it is extraterrestrial and manned at that?
Well, let's put it this way. We haven't, since the development of the Blackbird and the only operational Mach 3 airplane ever to be acknowledged, we haven't been sitting still. And the Blackbird's over 60 years old. 60 years.
Wow.
So you look at the technology development from 1903 to 1947, when Chuck Yeager first flew Mach 1 in a rocket-powered airplane, pushed out to less than 15 years later, going Mach 3, and we haven't been sitting still. Technology hasn't been sitting still. So, are some of the UFOs that we're seeing man-made? I have to say absolutely. I mean, the first time I saw an F-117, it was head-on as it was approaching Tonopah. It was a real low sun, and because of the faceting, it looked like it was changing shape, when in fact it didn't. But you look at an F-117 head-on, it looks like a flying saucer.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially since it's triangular shaped, a lot of people have reported for decades triangle-shaped black UFOs, and then all of a sudden you have a triangle-shaped craft, which to me, as a matter of fact, the very first time I had seen it, I too thought, wow, that is, if not an ET, which is after I saw one land here at Van Nuys Airport back when they had air shows at the time, I was like, well, I'm very curious if the reason why it is shaped the way it is, especially the bomber, the stealth bomber, the way it has the ridges at the back of the craft, I was like, I wonder if the reason why they made it the triangle it is because of what they've seen fly with ET craft.
Well, probably not, because Lazar mentioned that at S4 he worked on the sports model. He said the propulsion system was the same for the other 8 UFOs that were in hangars there.
All 9 of them. All 9 of
Now,
them essentially used gravity propulsion, right?
Anti-gravity propulsion, correct. And I asked Bob. I said, "Okay, I want to go from one end of the universe from the other. How do you do it?" So you focus one point where you want to go. As soon as you release the energy from here, or however they do it, you're there. There's no time interval. I mean, it's
Instant,
like
right? Instantaneous.
Right now. I mean, there's no time delay. Now, I don't know if do you age 100 million years if you come back the other direction? I don't know. Probably not. But that's a question that hasn't been asked or answered yet either. So, but the technology, we haven't been sitting around, and there's too many brilliant people that are working on spooky programs, and just I still have a lot of very high level friends at the Skunk Works, and I asked one of them. He just retired here about 5 years ago. He was like the number 3 guy at Skunk Works. I said, "Okay." I said, "I know you can't tell me anything that's classified." He says, "Correct." I said, "But do we is Lockheed involved in any program that will get me excited?" And my buddy said, "I know everything that gets you excited as far as it comes to airplanes." And unfortunately, not that I know of. Now, there may be programs within the Skunk Works that he's not aware of, but I doubt it. But it could be a program or programs that are sponsored under the control of the Navy, much like Bob Lazar there at S4. Now, to go back to S4. Two events totally unrelated to Bob Lazar, totally unrelated to S4, but sort of adds power into the fact that S4 is real. Mm-hmm. Got a friend of mine spent 5 years at Area 51 as an Air Force tech, and there were days when they had nothing to do. The Lockheed had the airplanes torn apart or whatever. And they had their line badges or the security badges was good for the Nevada test site to include Area 51. And they had access to a Humvee, and I think it was 3 of them. They're out driving around, and they went all the way. They went around the north end of the Papoose Range, which is the backdrop to Area 51. And they just followed all the way around, and they're on Papoose Dry Lake bed, and they're looking for artifacts, bomb casings, maybe stuff from miners, or maybe stuff from the Lost Mormon tribe or whatever it was that transit the place back 150 years ago. And where they were just sort of looking around. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was a handful of black-clad security people with guns drawn. There were no vehicles, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And we see some identification. So they, the guys showed them their line badge, and the security people that confronted them said, "You have no reason to be here. I suggest you head back to where you belong." So they left. Now this was on the lake bed where Bob Lazar said that there's camouflaged hangars in the side of the mountain. So that's one item. There was another gentleman who he was a Mormon missionary or historian, and he was tracing the trail of the lost Mormon tribe. And it came up to, he'd followed it from Salt Lake, across Utah, across Nevada, and came up to, basically the perimeter area of Area 51. And he contacted Air Force, contacted CIA, contacted Department of Defense, and whomever, and was denied access. We don't care what you're searching for, even though it's a religious search, not an airplane search. We're not going to we're not going to give you permission to transit the south end of a restricted area. So he felt sort of, he was very, very disappointed, but he still wanted, he still had he still had to find the trail of the lost tribe. So he decided he was going to come from the other direction, from the Mercury side. So he decided he wasn't going to get cooperation from the feds. So he decided he was going to sneak in at night, and he got in, 5 or 6 miles into the area. And he's underneath. He found an undercropping where he was going to spend the rest of the night and the day, because they didn't. He was very, very aware of helicopters and airplanes. But the middle of the night, he had to go to the bathroom, and he got up and he looks across the wasteland there, probably to the west northwest, and he sees a glinting of. It looks like someone's opening a garage door a long, long way away. It's lifting up. The lights are getting brighter, and you can see the thing. He can't see any objects. He can't see any people. It's that way for sort of short period of time, and then the thing then the whatever light source was closes down. The next morning he wakes up, gets his binoculars. He looks across in the direction that he saw the light that night. There's nothing there. It's at the base of the Papoose Range, about where Papoose Lake is located. So those are two indicators that there was something on that part of the Papoose Range that, one, lit up the night for this Mormon missionary, and two, security people came from nowhere to harass my buddy, told him to go back to Area 51 where he belongs. So it's just another piece to the puzzle of proving that Bob Lazar is real.
And that S4 was where the tests and the craft were held, not Area 51, Area 51 proper, which was 15 miles north, right?
Well, no, the Papoose Range is in the other side of the Papoose Range at the south end, probably the southwest end of the mountain range. It's not part of this Area 51 complex at all.
Yeah, it's independent.
It's correct.
Let's catch up on some questions that have piled up here. I'm going back as far as I can, and then I'm going to move forward, everybody. So hang tight. Don't worry. We're going to ask your questions here. Has Mr. Goodall ever heard of the military doing DNA experiments, biology experiments, or even search for DNA from giants to experiment on?
No, I haven't. Other than the fact that I was required to give him my DNA as a member of the military, but that's it. And that's medical end, and that's not an area that have done any research or dug into at all. So,
Playa 1080 asks, what does Jim think about Stargates or the Bermuda Triangle?
I don't, as far as the Bermuda Triangle goes, that's been weird forever. And there's an anomaly there in the area that causes, ships to sink and airplanes to disappear. That's a given. I mean, that's not even speculation. That's a given. As far as the Stargate goes, part of the storyline for the movie with Kurt Russell, Stargate, part of that was based on fact of a big movable ring and structure they found in Egypt in the 1920s.
I've heard that too.
I've
heard that it was based on what had really happened.
Right. So is there such thing as a Stargate? Well, if Bob's UFOs, or was it unknown aerial phenomena, UAP? Just say flying saucer. We all know what you start adding all these new names to it. It's a friggin' flying saucer.
Yeah.
The fact that Bob indicated that the technology exists to go from one end of the universe to the other. It wouldn't surprise me to have a physical portal which you could dial a destination and then walk to it, and you're there. That wouldn't be as too far-fetched at all. Not based on what we have done in the last 100 years. Look what happened in the 20th century. We went from horse and buggy to guys landing on the moon. We went from a crystal radio to having, we're broadcasting worldwide.
Yeah. And again, you could even do so off an iPhone. That's the crazy part these days. I'm going to skip G. Don's question. I don't think it's even worth asking because I know what the answer is going to be, both from you and obviously I know the answer myself. You want to hear it anyway? It's kind of one of those questions where it's no, next. G. Don wants to know if you think the Earth is flat.
No.
Thank you. That's my answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't understand. I mean, there's some relatively intelligent people honestly believe that the world is flat.
I just don't know where that came from, honestly. It blows my mind that, 2,000 years after my ancestors in Greece, confirmed that it is not flat, that people question that this day. But okay, we asked it.
Right.
Let me get to the next part. Does he think there is a soul catcher on the moon like John Lear said?
A soul catcher?
Yeah. I don't know
like
what that means.
S-O-U-L?
Yeah.
Soul?
Yeah, like your soul leaves the body.
Well, I know we sort of live in a spiritual environment, and there are people who say that the human bodies are a repository for souls. The souls never die. The bodies die, but the souls don't.
The containers die.
Yeah. We're like one of the 25-cent deposit on a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
We just keep recycling them, keep filling them up with new stuff. So is there a repository? I don't know if it's on the moon or not. It may just be in our mind. I don't know. It just when it comes to that stuff, I am a hardware guy.
Yeah.
And that's why I focus. I am not a UFO guy, but I believe in UFOs. I know I got to believe they're real. I know Bob is real. I know my friend that chased one is real. My boss in the Air Guard was real. What he chased was real. So, do I believe in UFOs? Yeah. Do I believe in some of the other stuff? Well, not really. I mean, I don't. I'll just put a question mark there.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, more for you. What does he think the Chinese agenda is for going to the moon? Mineral rights, research, or military dominance?
All of the above.
Good answer.
All the above. Why in the hell it's taken 50 years plus to bring us back to the moon slays me. I hear people, we shouldn't spend our money on that crap. I mean, we could give it to the homeless. The homeless are going to be homeless whether we give them $1 million or not. They'll piss it away the next day anyway.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, I've asked quite a few, like, hey, you have means to not be homeless. And they're like, yeah, we're okay where we are. You're right. Some people, that's what they want. They don't want responsibility. A lot of them are vets. Surprisingly, people who panhandle make a pretty penny depending on where they are. It kind of like, wait a minute, why am I working? And when you're out there panhandling for $100 an hour, hey, they make it. And they're happy living under bridges. If that's their life, so be it.
This is a number of years ago. I'm talking about probably still in the 20th century, not the 21st century. They did an audit of street people in San Francisco, and they after interviewing these guys, and they said, okay, we're not going to turn you in. We're not going to use your name or where you're panhandling or whatever. But they figured the average panhandler in the city of San Francisco in the 1990s was netting. I mean, they don't pay taxes or FICA or anything on it. They were pocketing $65,000 to $70,000 a year.
Whoa! Wow!
And they're panhandling. I mean, they looked like they didn't have a pot to pee in or to wonder to throw it out. And here in Tucson, I live in the Tucson area, and here in Tucson, they did one of the investigative journalists started following this one fairly infamous street peddler or panhandler. And it turns out the guy has a relatively new Mercedes, and they followed him home. And he lives in a nice community. It's not quite a gated community, but a $400,000 to $800,000 in California that would be a shack. But
yeah,
we're talking about Arizona. We're talking about Arizona. Anything from a 2,500 to a 5,000 square foot home.
That reminds me of a Greek movie that I saw when I was, in the, I guess, mid-'80s is when it came out. And it was about this professional panhandler. And, in the opening scene, he looks like he's a one-legged man, blind. And there's a hole in the cement. And there's a piece of, cardboard over it. And he stuck his foot down the hole and has his pants, look like he's a one-legged man. And he's sitting there panhandling. And after he realizes enough people have, dropped money in his little cup, he looks around, makes sure no one's watching him. He gets up. He gets in the back seat of a Mercedes, comes out the other side of the back seat of the Mercedes, dressed in a nice suit, Rolex, briefcase, gets in the front and drives off. So the story of what you just said about following this panhandler who ends up living in this nice home, driving a Benz, I swear literally is just like that Greek movie. And I'm sure that idea has been around for a movie, probably could be made in America if they really wanted to. I'm not sure if that's the idea came from.
The movie with Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, Trading Places. Yeah.
Trading Places, yeah.
Great
same
movie.
Thing.
It is the same
thing.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right. Okay, next one for you. The Secret Spaceship asks, can the TR-3B go to the moon?
I don't think any air-breathing vehicle can. You're going into space. You're going to need a pressure vessel because you're going into pretty much a vacuum. You're going to have to be protected some way against micrometeorites and space debris if you're as you pass through the lower orbits, heading towards the moon, and you have to be protected against radiation. So you start adding all that up, in a spacecraft, you have a big rocket to push you or a ion generation engine or whatever it is to propulse you, wherever you're going. For a manned launch, surface to orbit to the moon on a single type of craft. No, I don't think that's possible today, but it doesn't mean it's not impossible. But I don't believe we have that today. Not what I consider a traditional aircraft.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an aircraft if that was the case, right?
Right. It would have to be something like the Tic Tac or something like any one of the thousands of UFOs have been spotted over the last 150 years.
Gidon asks, what's his thoughts on time travel?
Yeah, if I could time travel, I'd go back however many years and give some condom to the parents of the fathers of a whole bunch of politicians. I won't even get into the politicians. But
that would be a great idea. I'd
give them condoms, and knowing I know today, I would take out Hitler.
Yes.
I would take out Hitler as a young man.
Actually, not just him. I would say the upper echelon.
No.
Yeah, all of them. Like you said, as they were young men, probably even before they were born, and just destroy that lineage.
Yeah. But you have to remember, if you time travel backwards and you make any change whatsoever, that affects absolutely everything else.
Yeah.
So it may mean that the person that you decided to eliminate had some influence on your mother or your father at some time in the far distant future, and it prevented them from meeting, which prevented them from getting married, and you becoming their offspring. So all of a sudden, you go back in time. You give condoms to a whole bunch of dads of people that you don't want to see in the future. But you may be related distantly by one of them, and all of a sudden, you don't exist anymore. You're gone. So, and people ask me, said, and I've had a lot of ups and downs in my life. I've buried 2 sons. That's not I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I have probably the most wonderful son and beautiful, intelligent daughter in the world, and I'm proud of them. But any change in my life, even a 1-minute decision that I made in 1962, I would probably not be talking to you today.
Yeah.
You cannot go and change the past. You can go and look in the future and say, where you screwed up on doing something, or maybe you go into the future. Let's say it's 1970, and you go into the future, and they said, "Oh, there's Apple. Oh, when there's some guy named Jobs is looking for investors. I'm gonna mortgage the house and give them everything." Same with Xerox. Same with
and Bill Gates
Microsoft
and Facebook. I would do the same thing with those two, with Microsoft and Facebook. Any of those, right? I'd sell my shirt off my back for some shares.
Yeah. But
okay.
I'm so unlucky when it comes to investments. If I were to go out and get $100,000 worth of gold bullion, within 90 days, it would be declared a hazardous substance, and it would cost me $250,000 to get rid of it. So,
more for you, Matt. I think
sure.
It's Matt Street. It's st. Or I hope it's not Matt Saint. Okay, please ask him about what he knows about technology on Moon or aliens on Moon.
I got a buddy of mine who was he was a photo analyst for the Strategic Air Command. His job was to analyze imagery from KH-11, SR-71, and U-2 imagery. And he was privy to a whole bunch of high-resolution Apollo flights around the moon, where they were looking at locations on the far side of the moon. And he was able, he said that as far as he was concerned, he has indicated that there are man-made structures on the far side of the moon. And it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
And now we know the Chinese are there too, on the dark side of the moon. Actually, right now there's a rover.
Right. And who knows what we have? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that have been launched and whatever that we have no idea what it's doing up there. So, we may have activities, we may have hardware and stuff on the far side as well. But until we get high resolution imagery unless and until our government, now when it comes to UFOs, we may not be in charge of the dissemination of the information. It may be they are in charge.
The ETs.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Very, very possible that that's the reason why so-called disclosure is going as slow as it will. Or maybe that's the whole reason there's the secrecy in the first place. Maybe because it's engineered to be that way because they want to stay that way.
When Barry Goldwater was getting ready to run for Senate from the state of Arizona, he had indicated he had actually started the first UFO group in Arizona, if not one of the very, very first ones in the country. And he said, if elected president or at the time he was a senator, he said, I will start digging into UFO stuff, and anything I find, I'll release. Jimmy Carter said the same thing. He was a real proponent of UFOs, and he said, and this is when during the campaign, someone asked him about UFOs, and he said, if I'm elected president, I will release everything on UFO activities that we have in our, in the archives or whatever. And once he became president, he conveniently forgot about that and denied ever saying anything like that.
And Ronald Reagan, if I'm not mistaken, he had his 2 sightings, right? And he also, too, was very interested, never released anything. We know the Clintons were involved, and yet they never told us anything. It seems to me that everyone who's campaigned on that, once they get to the Oval, like you said, they conveniently forget about campaigning on that and don't seem interested in releasing the files anymore.
Well, Kelly Johnson, the founder of the Skunk Works, saw one in the 1950s. They still can't explain today. There's just too many things that have happened in the past that the only way they could have been built or happened or whatever it is would be the involvement of aliens. I mean, you look at the pyramids, you look at Machu Picchu, you look at some of the stone engraving or carvings on in South and Central America and elsewhere, where they actually show what appears to be flying saucers in the air with beams coming down, creatures with big heads and big eyes. Now these things are are all over the world. How did it happen? Same with pyramids. I mean, you go to Thailand, you go to Yucatan Peninsula, you go to Egypt, you go to places all over the world. There are pyramids,
and not on this world too. Moon, Mars, right?
Right.
Next questions for you, if you're ready. Sure. Do you have any info on the Antarctic and ancient aliens?
There's been all sorts of stuff just recently been making minor headlines where they figure they've done some sonar testing through ice, and there appears to be large
structures, right?
Structures
hallways,
under the ice,
buildings, etc. Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah. And as the ice melts, we might see more.
This is true.
Yeah,
this is true. I just before 9/11, I had requested, and it was tentatively approved, is I wanted to go to do a cover story on the resupply of Antarctica out of New Zealand, and it's handled by the 62nd Airlift Wing out of McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington. And I wanted to go down there. I wanted to go to the South Pole. I wanted to go to McMurdo Station. I wanted to hit everywhere that the C-17 would fly to. I wanted to be there and document all those locations. And this was just before 9/11. And of course, when 9/11 hit, everything, everything changed. Absolutely everything. So that fell apart. But I would love to go there. I think Emily Infinity went around Antarctica on a sailboat with another gentleman, and that she'd worked with out of Detroit.
They do have cruises. Yeah. I do know that. I know they're not cheap, but there are cruises down there.
Yeah,
It'd be fun to fly around. It'd be fun to skydive over there.
Do what?
It'd be fun to skydive over there. Knock on wood. I had some friends who passed away because they couldn't. I guess for whatever reason, their altimeters were off, or I don't know. I don't think they had a problem seeing them, but either because of the snow really threw them off with just being nothing but white. But they all sort of all but the last two out of the 12 jumpers essentially hit the ground without opening their mains, and they all passed away. Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Uh, Question from Rockstar. What does Jim think about jump rooms? Have you heard jump rooms? Andrew Basiago talks about them. I'll give you a brief story. He talks about different areas. I believe one was near LAX, and he says in a building there's a room that is like a transportation room. It jumps you from one location to the other. Some would be on another part of this planet. Others allegedly are on different times. Others are on, say, the moon or Mars. So again, the question is, what's your opinion on the jump rooms, if they exist?
To quote what Ben Rich told me just before he died, is if we've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. Which means, were they transported? It may be a transport facility, much like they have on the Star Trek,
right?
Star Trek Enterprise, yeah.
So very well, like you said, based on what he told you, then it's plausible that that is true.
Now they have done some experiments that they have. I read either in Aviation Week or some other technical publication where we have physically transported a solid object. It wasn't a very big object, but transported it from one place to another and reassembled it. I haven't heard anything about it since, but again, based on what Ben told me, and Ben would just absolutely drive the security people nuts at the Skunk Works. He would never violate security, but he's throwing out so many hooks out there that just whet your appetite and make you go digging. But when he told me, and again, I cherish my relationship with the late Ben Rich. I still to this day don't know why I was one of his chosen friends, or not a friend, a pen pal, or someone that I talk to 4 times a year.
Maybe because you had an open mind and you're a kind guy. I think the combination between the two, as opposed to others who may have not even had an open mind with some of the experiences that, say, Bob went through. I think it's the combination of the two, and you're a fun guy to talk to, so I could see why Ben would choose you.
Well, and the one thing that cracks me up, and Doc has mentioned it. I mean, everybody I've talked to said you're a legend. No, I'm Jim Goodall. I just
you are a legend.
And I
to
did
me.
all this. I did all this. All my research and digging stuff up was all before the internet.
Yeah.
So
much harder back then.
For me to sit down and talk with Dave, the SR-71 pilot, I had to fly to his location. For me, to do almost anything I did, I had to travel. I spent most of my adult life in Minnesota, so if I needed to interview someone from Lockheed, I had to come out to L.A. If I needed to talk to someone at Boeing, I had to go to Seattle. If I needed to talk to someone at General Dynamics, I had to fly to Fort Worth. So this was all done before there was easy access to information, and there's a lot of people, and I bless anybody who's willing to take the time and to dig into this. I mean, they have my full support and my encouragement. But there's a lot of people in this, I can't call it in the industry, but in this area of interest where they have really never left their desk. Everything that they've dug up, and they've done a good job, has been on the internet. And that's what makes people like Michael Schratz so special. He has physically gone. He's spent his own money to jump on an airplane and to fly somewhere to interview someone on UFO stuff, or go somewhere on his own nickel and gather all this incredible information. Every time Michael comes to visit me, he brings his his primary 3-wing binder, which is about 8 inches thick, and he always has goodies to give me. And he has like 50 or 60 4-drawer filing cabinets in storage that has all his research. And I finally at the UFO disclosure February in San Francisco of this year, the only one this year. Lauren Felton had put it on. Michael gave his presentation, and I've known Michael for almost 20 years. It's the first time I ever heard him give a presentation, because I haven't been involved in the UFO community up until last year. And I was really, really impressed. And it was Paul Hayek was there.
Paul Hynek.
I was talking to Paul.
Just had him on last week.
I was talking to Paul, and I was talking to Michael, and I can't remember. I don't know. I knew Dave Scott may have been there. I'm not sure. And I told Michael, I said, you need to do a book. So where do I start? I said, you take the videotape of your presentation and you put it in book form. That's all you have to do. You have all the supporting documents and everything that goes with it. So he finally did it, and he's up. I think he has 22 events starting back in the 1880 something, whatever it is, and it's on Amazon. It's an ebook. He said he's putting together the ability to do a print on demand for people who want
a hard copy.
Want a hard copy versus a soft copy, and it's 90 to 100 pages. It's color, and it has all the links for all the supporting documents, the original artwork drawn by the person who observed the event, police reports, NASA reports, Air Force reports, all this stuff. He has all the support documentation all together. So and I support everything Michael does. He is the most focused, dedicated UFO researcher on the planet, and I give him 10 gold stars for doing that, because nothing discourages him. He does get discouraged, but he has friends like me who won't let him back down.
He's good support.
To keep on going. Right. Well, I'm almost like his big brother or a dad to him. And he said, "Well, I started this because of you." And I said, "No, you didn't. You did. I may have helped you get interested in it, but you did this all on your own." And I applaud Michael and everything he does. He's one of the most thorough investigators on the planet when it comes to UFOs. And he has more documentation. I mean, he has hundreds of thousands of pages, if not millions of pages, of documentation supporting evidence as it relates to UFO sightings.
Now, we are almost at 2 hours. Jim, do you want to go? There's more questions, or we could save them for next time. I'll leave it up to you.
No, we can go on for a little bit longer.
We'll go on for a little bit, because I was going to say I have since we never went back to Bob Lazar, I'm going to save that for next time I interview, because I have plenty of questions I could ask you about that.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Then let me just scour this for a couple questions of the people who didn't have a chance to ask one, and then everyone who didn't have a chance to ask one, or people who question, I've gotten at least one to then save the time, because we are literally close to the end. If someone wants to get to the top of the line with your questions, then drop a super chat. Dave Mason wants to know, what do you think about remote viewing?
My grandmother could do it. My mom could do it. My mom's father was a Sicilian fisherman, and he moved the entire village of Isola della Femme outside of Palermo, Sicily, and moved them to the San Joaquin Sacramento Delta area, the Bay Area. And he was in charge of all the Portuguese, Italian, and Sicilian fishermen from San Francisco to San Pedro. He was the boss. And every year he would get his fleet of fishing boats, and they'd head to Alaska and fish for salmon or whatever. And this is back in just the turn of the century. I'm talking about 1901, 1902, a billion years ago. And they would be gone for 5 months. And my grandmother was the matriarch of the clan there in Pittsburgh, California. That's not that far. It's about 40 miles from San Francisco on the Sacramento Delta. And Nana used to entertain all the wives would come to my grandmother and say, Angelina, can you tell me if Giuseppe or Salvatore or whomever, are they okay? Has anybody been hurt? Has anybody been sick? And she said, well, in my dreams tonight, I will ask my great aunt, who had been dead for 1,000 years, and I'll ask her the question. And tomorrow, come by the house, and I will give you the answer. If you fell off a fishing boat while fishing in Alaska, the currents, they have 45-foot tides, and the currents can go 15 knots, depending on the time of the tide going in or coming out. And it was always assumed because, one, the water is so cold. I mean, in some cases, it's like 36, 32 degrees, 34 degrees. In some cases, even in the 20s, and the only thing keeping it from freezing, it's salt water, and the water's moving too fast with the extreme tides. But if you fell overboard, you were considered dead. There was no way to retrieve you. The boats had, 1 or 2 cylinder diesel engines that would do 5 knots, maybe 6 or 7 knots. You always had to go with the tide. My grandmother woke up in the middle of the night screaming. She said, Papa has fallen overboard. And she wrote it down on her calendar of the time, what the time was when she was startled, out of a dead sleep. And it wasn't for another 2.5 months before my grandfather brought the fleet home. And he told her, he says, Angelina, said, you almost came really close of being a widow.
Ooh.
And she said, why is that? She said, such and such a day to such and such a time, I tripped and fell overboard, but my foot got caught in one of the nets, and they were able to pull me in. And she pulled out her calendar, and he says, is this the day? And he was dumbfounded because that was the day and the time, because it's light 24 hours a day up there in the summer.
And you're talking about Alaska, yes, right? That
right,
would make sense.
Right.
6 months of the year, 24/7. That's insane.
And the other thing would happen is they all got paid in cash, and everybody got a different pay envelope. And they go up there, they earn their entire year's living on that 5 months trek up to Alaska and back. And the wife, when they knew that the fishing fleet was on its way back, they go to my grandmother's and they say, Angelina, I said, can you tell me what so and so has in his pay envelope? Because what the wives were concerned about, since the guys are being paid in cash, are they going to gamble it away? There's no place to spend your money because they're out at sea. They do go into port to get food and stuff like that, but they go in and they go right back out. And they'd come in and ask my grandmother, how much did so and so make? And she would ask her great aunt in her sleep that night, and she would write it down. And they'd come in. They'd come in the next day, and Nana would have the amount of money in the pay envelopes. I don't know if it was to the penny, but it was to the dollar.
Wow.
To my grandmother, and she was always right. She was
On the
always
money,
right.
literally. On the money, no pun intended. There's a request here. Lasha asked a couple times. I said, okay, I will ask this. I was going to ask you when we get off, but I'll just ask this. She said, let me get the exact one that sounded a little bit better. She said to blame her for asking this again. She says, would you be willing to come on my show, Doc Show, she says, and bring Bob Lazar?
I probably not. I'm a friend of Bob's, and I can get on the phone and call him right now and talk to him, but I don't. I have always kept Bob as
Safe.
a friend,
Yeah.
not as someone not someone I want to drag along with me. So I would say he would more than likely say no.
Yeah. I know.
But then again, maybe not. It depends. It depends on who the person is. I'll say I'm going to go visit him I was going to visit him this month, but with COVID and everything else that's nuts here, I can't. I'm going to do it this spring.
Yeah, I would wait especially till the peaceful protests so-called stop up there. I'm talking about getting out of Phoenix, LA. You don't want to drive through any state right now, especially crossing through states. What if one state doesn't want you coming in? What if you can't get out of Arizona and say you wanted to come visit me in LA? You may not want to even get from one state to the other. How can you go even in Arizona? Let me ask you this. Can you even travel from Tucson to Phoenix with
for 3 weeks, the last week of April and the first 2 weeks of May, I left here and I had driven to Minneapolis. I was there for George Floyd's demise, and then decided to cut my trip short because I didn't know what kind of craziness was going to go in other cities. So I came home, and then the end of July, the last week of July, is I headed out. I went up to Doc Skinner's, spent the night with him, and then off to Albuquerque, and then from Albuquerque to Minneapolis. And then from there, from Minneapolis to the Air Force Museum in Dayton, and then I went to the Corvette Museum because I have a Corvette, and then I went to the it's the Aviation Unmanned Vehicle Museum in Cato Mills, Texas. A guy named Marshall Smith and his dad Dave have one of the most unique little drone museums there is. I mean, he has enough parts and pieces of propeller-driven drones. These are the ones you shoot down. These are target drones.
Okay, so you're not talking about the military Reaper drones. You're talking about the $1,000 movie drones.
He has an X-7, which was a hypersonic ramjet test bed that went up to Mach 6, I think it went up to all Mach 12, I think it was.
Hypersonic.
This is back in the 50s. He has one of those. He has a BGM-34, which was a Ryan drone, and this particular one has dropped and fired weapons at the VC during the war in Vietnam, and it had a half a dozen flights because it was parachute recoverable. And he has one of those. I mean, it is just a slick place. If you go to the Aviation Unmanned Vehicle Museum, and let me get my glasses. Shit. And you go to drones at auvm.net, or you just go auvm.net. That's their website.
auvm.net. I just wrote it down.
M like in museum. A like in apple. U like in undressed. V like in victory. M like in Michael.
Oh, M as in Nancy. Gotcha.
.net. And if you're anywhere near the Dallas area, it's on US 30. I think it's exit number 82, and it's only about a mile off the road, and you can't miss it because when you turn off on that road, eventually goes right in front of the airport, which the Smith family owns, and there's a sign there, and you just. I found it when I was looking for some drone stuff, and then I really liked what I saw, and then I sent them everything I had on Lockheed drones, like RQ-170, like Senior Prom, and the X7, a bunch of other ones, a D-21. I sent him all that stuff. And he just got really excited. And then when I went on my road trip, I decided I needed, I really, really wanted to promote these guys and help these guys any way I could. So I've been, I published a whole bunch of photos of the place on Facebook. Now, people said, "Do you have a website?" And I said, "No, I don't, and I probably never will." So why's that? I said, I spend enough time on the computer as it is, writing books and wasting my time on Facebook. I don't need another platform to piss somebody off at. I'm really good at that, by the way. Said, I irritate enough people as it is with just one platform to vent my views. So
let me ask you about your 27 books. You have a new one coming out in December. What's it called?
75 Years of the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's by Osprey Publishing. It is hardbound. The foreword is by Jeff Babion, the Vice President and General Manager of the Lockheed Skunk Works. The introduction is by Steve Justice, who was the Director of Strategic Programs for the Lockheed Skunk Works, now retired. I cover, I think it's 43 programs, about 1,000 photos, 332 pages, hardbound, color in black and white. And I just, I love the front cover artwork and everything associated with it. What I write about, most of my books are based on things that are considered low observables or stealth. So I have the B-2, the F-117, the F-22, F-35, the various submarines, and of course, a lot of stuff. Most of the stuff the Skunk Works has come out with. So if you're interested in any of my books, if you go into books by James C. Goodall on Amazon, or books by Jim Goodall. Why I've changed it over the years, I don't know, but I've bounced back and forth between the two. You'll see some by Jane Goodall, and her chimpanzees, and I am related to her down the road a ways. But go and you get it. My Blackbird book is $45, but I think you can get it for $32 and free shipping on Amazon if you're an Amazon Prime member. My newest book from Sheffer came out about 4 months ago. It's on the Seawolf Virginia class fast attacks. It's 176 pages, all color, and it covers everything from the reactor bulkhead forward, including production shots and all in the interiors, all of the captions have been gone through by actual crew members on the subs that I photographed. And it took me 7.5 years to get on a Seawolf boat. They only have 3 of them. You can't get within 1,000 yards of the Jimmy Carter because that's a spook boat. So I had to wait for either the Connecticut or the Seawolf to be at Bremerton and not be torn apart. And I happened to get there. It had just come off a patrol, so they hadn't started dismantling, everything, because they totally rebuild the subs after a long patrol. They go through it's refit and resupply. So that's covered. And a couple of people in the submarine community were amazed that they let me on a Seawolf.
I would imagine.
So
I've heard former people who used to work while in their military career worked on subs. Even in their retirement, can't go visit them unless those submarines are retired and docked and available for tours. Right,
and the thing about, and one of the reasons I I have a 3-volume set. When I'm done with it, it'll be 3 volumes. The first volume is on the Los Angeles class and the 688, the 688 and the 688I, which is the Los Angeles class and the Los Angeles class improved. And then volume 2 is the Seaworth Virginia class. These are fast attacks. And then volume 3 is on the Ohio boats, the 560-foot long, 18,000-ton submerged, basically a submerged Death Star.
Ooh, whoa, that'd be cool to see.
The Ohio boats, the ballistic missile submarines, at their peak, this is before SALT, they had 24 launch tubes, and using the Triton II Lockheed developed D5 missile, it can carry 14 W-88s, which I think are 245 kilotons each. Each one could carry 14.
Jeez. Wow.
And they're up to 24 on a boat, on a submarine. Now with SALT II, they had to put ballast in. They had to reduce the tubes from 24 to 20, so they filled 4 of the middle tubes with ballast. I don't know if they welded the hatches closed, but it's in full compliance with SALT. And then they're also limited to 3 MIRVs, and these are maneuverable reentry vehicles. In other words, you punch in the GPS, it's going to hit within about 10 meters of where you want to hit. But when you're dealing with a 250 kiloton nuke, close counts. And at any given time, there is an Ohio boat in the Pacific and one in the Atlantic, and they can also the boats at Bangor tied up to the Delta Pier. If they wanted to launch without going out to sea, they could hit every one of their Russian targets without ever leaving Puget Sound. And the same with the subs coming out of Kings Bay, Georgia.
Talk about how our technology has really gotten that insanely accurate and good for us, at least.
Well, your GPS-guided weapons, whether it's a nuke, whether it's a ballistic missile, launch or whatever it is, or a cruise missile. I mean, the accuracy now is within a meter to a meter and a half. So you're looking at from 3 to 6 feet or 3 to 5 feet from hitting the center of your target. And if you're dropping a MOP from a B2, that's the massive ordnance penetrator. It weighs 30,000 pounds, and the B2 can carry 2 of them. And it's a deep penetrator. It'll go down 200 feet through reinforced concrete and rock before it detonates.
Wow.
And then they have the Marine Corps, actually it's the Air Force developed, it's the MOAB, massive
mother of all bombs, right?
Well, they call it mother of all bombs, but it's not an explosive like TNT or whatever. It is a gas bomb, and what it does, as it's coming close to the ground, it is releasing or going into a tunnel, and it's releasing 20,000 pounds worth of probably propane. And then when the fuel-air mixture gets at the optimum, it ignites. And what it does, it burns up literally all of the oxygen in the valley. And it will turn people inside out if they were in a tunnel. And I actually saw the results of it. Back in the early 60s, we used to have a weekly Air Force Now film, and it shows what we're getting ready for war and stuff like that. And they probably don't do that today. But we were just in the early throes of Vietnam. I know they knew we were having problem with tunnel rats, so they wanted to see what a fuel air bomb would do to render these tunnel rats useless. So in Eglin Air Force Base, they dug a whole series of tunnels, to emulate what the VC was doing in Vietnam, and they put pigs and pigs and sheep in these tunnels, and then dropped a fuel air bomb over them, and it consumed the oxygen so rapidly that it literally pulled the internal organs from the animals out of their mouths.
Ooh.
I mean, it literally turned them inside out, and they were still alive. Some of them were still alive when they went in to see what the result was. So,
talk about our tech again. Here's a quick request for you. This is third phase of the moon is in the chat. Just so you know, Blake and Brent Cousins live in Hawaii. They said to tell you aloha from the Cousins brothers. Can't wait to see you in Hawaii.
Well, as soon as their stupid governor will let things loose. Yeah. I mean, I lived in Waikiki for 4 years. I lived at the Ilokai, and the thing that made Hawaii wonderful, besides the weather and the ocean, is all the funkiness that was associated with Hawaii. Not the big resorts or whatever, but I'm talking about the trashy little trinket store in the old international market, which was taken over by high rises and glitzy stuff. I mean, it just killed the personality of a lot of Waikiki. But all those places are gone. They have been almost in total lockdown since March. There's been no international travel. There's been no travel from the mainland, because if you go there and you land, they quarantine you for 14 days. And when you check into your hotel, your key is only good for one use. That's to go into the room. If you leave and go do something else, and you go back and you try to use your key, it doesn't work. You have to go down to the desk and get a new one, and then they call the police, and either they fine you or they arrest you.
I was just gonna say you end up in the slammer, and that it's ironic. You're describing Hawaii, but if you didn't say Hawaii, it's like you'd be describing where I'm at right now. It's pretty bizarre. Go ahead and finish.
It's the idiots.
Yeah.
It's the idiots we have to deal with, unfortunately.
Well, I have a feeling that in 37 days this will all be yesterday's news, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Well, let me say one request for you, Jim. If you can stay by for a quick moment after, so I could thank you off air. And real quick,
sure.
let me give a couple shout-outs here. I already mentioned Third Phase of Moon. Thank you, guys. I also want to mention Rockstar. Thank you for the super chat. I also want to thank Pam Vrattenberg for the amazing video, for moderating me, for being my assistant, my manager, and so much more at that. And remember, folks, she does run my social media, so if you do want to contact me there, since I am never there, she is the person behind Facebook, etc. Everybody else, I would love to give you a one-on-one shout out, but there's well over 100 of you, so I want to give you all a big shout out in mass. For all of you, those who I didn't get your question in, I can promise you this. Jim is such a cool cat. I spoke to him over 90 minutes yesterday, just talking about technology, how my family comes from engineers, and all the cool little stuff. This is not going to be the only time, so all you have to do is subscribe to this channel and pay attention. My new website is going live in literally a matter of days. The archives are going up. You could also check there periodically, and you'll see Jim back on soon, because there's so much more to talk about. I didn't even get a chance to ask him about some of the specific experiments that Bob Lazar talked to him about. For instance, in 2015, when I saw him at the UFO Congress, he talked about the candle experiment. It was frozen in time, or I'm sure he could talk about the cloud chamber experiment. All this stuff, I promise you, we'll get to next time or the time after that. There's lots to talk about. So with that being said, Jim, I want to thank you publicly again. I want to thank you off air, so hang by. But if you have one final thing to say to everybody, at least today, what would it be?
Do not give up. If you're digging into something, I mean, it took me 50 years to finish my ultimate Blackbird book. So if you're focused on getting information or doing research on a UFO event or a person involved in it, like Bob Lazar or John Lear or even a Jim Goodall or Michael Schratt, don't give up, because you'll wear the bastards down eventually. And that's what. And I am. When I was in the Air Guard, and I bounce all over the place, by the way, but when I was in the Air Guard, my boss, General Broman, he's a brigadier general, was back in Washington, D.C. for a generals conference. And these were all generals from the Air Force, Air National Guard, and Air Force Reserve. And it was a week-long function. General John Vesey was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And General Broman said that somewhere during about the middle of the week, somehow my name came up. And I was a subject of conversation for well over, I think he said 43 minutes by his watch. And then near the end of the conference, General Vesey came up to General Broman and said, John, he said, so those of us in the Joint Chiefs, we like your Sergeant Goodall. I said, most of the senior staff like him. About 5% of the junior officers would like to have him whacked, but we won't let that happen. But we've given him a nickname. We refer to your Sergeant Goodall as Agent Orange.
Ooh.
So,
where did that come from?
I was given the handle by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because I'm always digging into stuff I'm not supposed to be digging into. I've been to the fence line at Area 51 and Tonopah Test Range over 80 times. I've had little red dots on my chest.
Oh, you're talking about the lasers, the laser pointers, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, mounted on M16s.
Wow.
So
you've seen a thing or two, to say the least. And you've been quite a few places.
But whatever you do, don't knowingly break the law. If you go out in the desert, you know where you're at. If you're on BLM, now I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah.
Right, BLM property. If you're in BLM property, the security guys within Tonopah Test Range or Area 51, they have no jurisdiction outside of the perimeter of those bases. So they can come and they can harass you. They can try to intimidate you out of the area, but do your very, very best not to break the law. Because if you decide, okay, I want to sneak into Area 51, if you get caught, you're not going to get shot, but you're going to have probably the worst 10 days of your life, and it's probably going to end up costing you thousands of dollars in attorney fees. And if they confiscate your car, they bring it up to Panoche, which is 100 miles from Vegas, or 100 miles from Area 51. So you have to manage to get up there to get it back, and it's probably a rent-a-car or whatever. It's not worth it. The other thing, if you go out in the desert and you're snooping around, you're trying to see something flying on S4 or whatever, the one thing you desperately need in the desert is a lot of water.
Yeah, I would
For every
think so.
day you're out there, you want at least 1.5 gallons, probably more. And the other thing you have to be aware of, there's some really nasty things in the desert. There are scorpions, which are really a nuisance more than anything else. There are coyotes, and there's other things.
Red ants, right?
Pardon?
Red ants.
Yeah, your fire ants. But what they also have snakes. Now, if you get bit by a Mojave green is one of 26 types of rattlesnake we have here in the U.S., and the only state that has all of them is Arizona. But if you get bit by a Mojave green, you better sit down, make peace with God, because by the time they get you to the hospital, it's going to be too late. Because you're 150 miles from. If you're at Area 51, you're 150 miles from Las Vegas. If you're at Tonopah Test Range, you're sort of in between Las Vegas and Reno. So you're 150 to 200 miles away. Even a fast helicopter, by the time they were able to get to you, get a helicopter, get you to a hospital, you're as cold as yesterday's pizza. So you just beware. Be safe. That's probably the most important thing you can do. Be safe.
Well, that's advice everybody can follow, and I have to say this has been a super amazing 2.5 hours. Now, tomorrow, because of the debate, I don't plan on doing anything. If I do, it'll be done long before the debate. Normally, I don't broadcast on Wednesdays because I don't like to compete with Linda Moulton Howe, but I might make an exception, and if I do, it'll be probably for an hour, or I may just do who I planned on Thursday. I don't want to say his name because things do come up, but it is someone that many of you have requested. All I can say is just pay attention. Now, Jim and I are officially going off air. Thank you, folks, and just I hope to